Welcome to the Reggie podcast, where we explore what it means to seek God's kingdom here on earth. Join us on our journey to become more aware of and encouraged by God's work in and around us. In this series, we are looking at how we as individuals in our personal lives, as well as in our spheres of influence, can become more kingdom-centric. In today's podcast, we want to consider what Reggie calls the Kingdom Saga. Reggie, what do you mean by that phrase, and how does it help us become more kingdom-aware and focused?
The kingdom, of course, as I talk about a good bit, is life as God intends. Quality of life, Jesus called it abundant life. It was also kicked around in scriptures as eternal life, which is a quality of life, not length of life. And so the kingdom saga is the extent that God will go to make sure that we have access to that life. I mean, when you think about in the Garden of Eden, God sends an angel when the tree of life is threatened to stand guard over life, because that is his gift. And that is a gift that he doesn't recall. I mean, once God declares life, human beings are built to last. I mean, we don't go out of existence. So it's an unbelievable concept, but it just happens to be a foundational part of being created in the image of God. And so the kingdom saga then is all of the stuff that God starting in the garden, protecting life, but then ultimately coming to the planet to live the life in front of us. I mean, I grew up in a tradition where we honored Jesus' work on the cross in terms of its atonement and redemption and its substitutionary qualities. What I've learned in more recent time, or come to see, I think, in a different way, is that it's Jesus' life, not just his death, but it's his life that speaks volumes to us about the quality of life that God intends for all of us. In fact, Jesus lives out the kingdom saga in his life. Sacrificial love, humility, speaking truth, being a respecter of all persons. I mean, on and on and on. All of the character that he evidences, his disposition toward people, as well as his teachings. All of that was, as I say often, Jesus didn't come to establish a religion. He came to reveal the kingdom. And so that's God's big poster for, in terms of the kingdom saga, Jesus. That's why Jesus is it. As a friend of mine says, Jesus is the answer. He's the question. He's the reason. I mean, all of those things that, that you think of. I mean, he's the point. And so he comes, he lives it out, and then he invites us. I mean, again, I grew up in a tradition where I was taught to invite Jesus into my heart. Pray the prayer, and the truth of the matter is, Jesus has invited us into his heart. It's a different deal. He's saying, join me in my mission. If I'm the vine, you're the branches, you're a part of me. I mean, it's as silly or simple maybe as that sounds. It's a total different view of things, that we have been included in this kingdom saga through our relationship with Jesus, to participate with God's mission in the world, which is his kingdom. And so, keeping those things in mind, that God is at work around us all the time. He's wanting people to experience the life, and by the way, he's wanting you to experience the life that he intends for you. You're not outside the mission of God. You're square in his crosshairs of what he wants as well.
So what you're saying is that the kingdom of God is primarily a mission and not just a message.
Exactly.
So if helping people live better lives is what the kingdom saga is, what kinds of activities qualify as kingdom efforts?
Hannah, I think all efforts that enhance life as God intends, they're all kingdom efforts. I mean, one of the problems with a church-centric view of things is we think only if we do stuff in a spiritual way or under the auspices of some kind of spiritual sponsorship or church sponsorship, it only counts then. And so I get this question, this nonsensical question to me all the time. Well, all this good stuff is well and good, but I mean, when do we get to share the gospel? And I'm going, what part of the gospel did you miss? The gospel literally means good news. And it's the good news of the kingdom, by the way. It's not the gospel of the gospel. It's not the gospel of the church. The good news of the kingdom is what Jesus shared. Go read the Gospels. And that means that I've got good news for you. God is working on your behalf for you to have access to the life that He intends for you. And He is determined that you will have that experience. And He's done everything that he can dream up of doing in order to make that possible for you. But in the broader sense, I think that if the king is good, and he is, if the king is the only source of good, and he is, there's only one source of good in the universe, then all good flows from the king, just like all life flows from the king, all good flows from the king. So when we are helping people, a physician helping someone get well, a teacher helping someone to learn to read, someone picking up a kid that scraped her knee, or feeding a homeless person, that's hung. I mean, on and on and on. Every good deed is a reflection of the kingdom, in my estimation. So I think that would help us understand, exactly what God is up to, and I think that it's not even required that people understand their cooperating or co-conspiring with God. I mean, the Bible is full of examples of folks who are working with God even though they don't know it. I mean, Cyrus in the Old Testament is called the shepherd, Mashiach, literally Messiah. Here's a pagan king who is cooperating with God's vision or mission and what he wants to do, even though he's completely unaware of it. And so I think that there are people. Nebuchadnezzar is another example I'm thinking of, who's, in his repartee with Daniel and all of that. I mean, he's cooperating with our understanding of God, even though he is completely unaware of it. So I don't think people. I mean, I would be happy if everyone was aware. Gosh, I wish I could be aware all the time of what God was up to in my own life. But it's not a prerequisite. And so I think there, again, we don't have to make folks jump over, jump through hoops and everything to prove that they're spiritual and all that to be consider them to be part of what God is up to in the world. They are co-collaborators with Him in bringing about His kingdom.
So going off of that and talking about kind of the good deeds and service, you mentioned how the emergence of service is a core value of the millennial generation.
Yeah.
And as a millennial, I can definitely relate to that. For some reason, I think it was ingrained in a lot of us from a young age. However, I think some millennials reject the notion of church-centered charity work, so to speak, because it doesn't always feel genuine. It feels like something people do to get in good graces with God rather than something you genuinely want to do because, like you said, something's breaking your heart or you see a need that isn't being met. How do you think the church could partner with millennials, whether or not they're Jesus followers, to be of service to the community?
Great question. In fact, I was asked just last week. There are tons of churches out there that are growing older. In fact, the only reason church attendance is held up in America the way it has is because people are living longer. And so, but as you go down the generational food chain, I mean, this church participation just precipitately drops. And your generation, of course, is where a lot of folks suddenly it's dawned on them that this is going on, although it's been, a slow erosion. In your case, with your generation, it's a fast retreat. And so I think so many churches then say, how can we get millennials to come? How can we get younger? How can we get young people? It's the wrong question. Instead of, again, trying to get them to buy church so that that's their ticket for participation in the kingdom. I mean, how crazy is this? So I just told this group last week. It was an elder group from a mainline congregation, and yes, they are aging. And I said, give up on trying to get younger. What you need to do is get engaged in the community, and you'll suddenly find yourself working shoulder to shoulder with millennials who are also engaged in the community doing good work. And then you have an opportunity, just as a very natural part of conversation, when they ask, why are you doing this? I mean, that comes up. I mean, what is it that brought you to be a mentor at the school, or work at the food bank, or whatever, to beautify the park, whatever? Then it's a very natural thing for us to say, well, I'm doing this because, Jesus said, I'm a Jesus follower, and he said this is what we ought to be doing. And I think people are, all live better lives, and I'm all for it. So, I just want to be a person of blessing. And so I think that would honor millennials. It would also communicate something to millennials about the authenticity of service that's not necessarily tied to an institutional expression. Because then I tell people exactly when I'm doing hand-to-hand combat with churches and doing consults with them, don't turn that conversation into a church conversation. Like, I'm doing this because I'm a Jesus follower, and you need, if you come to church Sunday, you get it too. I mean, we got a sermon going on, and we'd love to have you and all that stuff. Well, I mean, say the stuff that's wrong, but don't make it feel like it's that you're out there marketing church. It just doesn't work with millennials, and it shouldn't, because then it's teaching them something that you don't want to teach them anyway. You want authentic service for service sake, for people's sake.
Yeah. So, Reggie, you like to say that God routinely turns the table on evil, flipping the script so that hell's strategies become kingdom advances. Can you elaborate on that?
Again, the Bible is full of stories where evil gives its best shot, and then God turns evil on its head. I'm just thinking, probably the most striking story in the Old Testament we can think of is Joseph. I mean, here's Joseph, who was not without blame. I mean, he taught his brothers not to like him. I'm coming down to the kitchen table in the morning. I had a dream last night. All you guys were bowing down and worship me. I don't think exactly that engendered fondness for him, but so his brothers get together, sell him into slavery. I mean, one brother wanted to kill him, and they said, no, let's get something for it. So, they sold him, and then he's thrown in jail. You may know the story. He winds up in prison, but eventually that same dreaming brings him out of prison into Pharaoh's court and the number 2 spot in the whole administration. And so, and even Joseph admits this when his brothers come to him in one of the great verses of the Old Testament, not the whole Bible, Genesis chapter 50. You're getting close to the end of the book there, verse 20, where he says, you meant this to me for evil, but God meant it for good. I just think that is such a beautiful, now I'm quoting King Jimmy language. You may have a more recent translation than that, but whatever translation you read it in, it just shows the power of God to take something that's evil. Now, in our own lives, it may not be just evil. It may be a frustration or some blockage of where we want to go or where we want to be, or maybe we feel like we're on our way finally, like out of Egypt, and we're making our progress. In the first place we wind up is at the Red Sea, a dead end. And you may feel like you're at a dead end right now, and that stuff is conspiring against you. I can tell you, I don't know how. I mean, I'm not God. I mean, this is why he's, quite comfortable in his role, and I'm happy for him to do it. For him to show up and show off, he just loves to do it. And so he uses the stuff that hell has stolen. He is redeeming and reclaiming and making it even more beautiful and attractive. And I know if that sounds too Pollyanna, because we can still point to situations, people in enormous suffering, and we go, where is God in that? And honestly, I don't know. I can't say that in every case. And honestly, if I had an answer for all that, I don't guess there'd be a need for faith. Um, but there's a belief in me that somehow God is pushing His agenda forward in all of these situations, even if we would call them evil or constricted or obstructive or whatever.
I think in your analogy of the airport hub is good. I mean, flight delays and flight cancellations.
Yeah,
Sometimes we think the worst is,
yeah.
it's happened to me, but reframing that as could have avoided something or, you know.
Boy, isn't that the truth? And I've thought about that a lot. I mean, you're exactly right. When something has been thrown into the middle of the day, it's just straight to your point. I remember I was in high school and I was driving. I hadn't been driving all that long, and I remember my brother was in the older brother's in the car. We were having a discussion, and it was and I mean it was a very involved discussion. So much so that I literally had really slowed down. I wasn't at the point where I just could talk and keep doing everything. So my foot came off the gas pedal, and I mean seconds later, a car, you know, turned erratically into the street. If I hadn't had that little bit of hesitation, unrelated to anything, I would have just been plastered. Now that's a simple little deal out of my own life, but you're right. I mean, we don't even know the times that we've been. In that case, I did, but how many hundreds of other times have that happened for me that I have no idea that it's even happened? And I think that's true for every listener. Obviously you can't know what you don't know, but if there's a fundamental faith that somehow God is at work through this, then it keeps my prayer life from being, won't you please hurry up, and a frustration where I just bellyache, which I've done plenty of, and I'm not incapable of dishing up more. But more and more, my prayer is like, I thank you, you're at work in this. Even though I cannot even see you at work in this, I thank you, you're at work. And I can't wait. And in some cases, I even say, I can't wait to see how you pull this one off. Because that's just God's love to show off.
Yeah. So let's focus for a bit on the storyline of the kingdom. How long does it take to play out?
It takes longer than a single lifetime. I think that's one of the reasons that church-centric thinking is so problematic. It squeezes God into the next 6-week series or whatever, and what God is up to can take decades. In fact, it can even take more, and often does in kingdom terms, more than a lifetime. I mean, the legacy that I am leaving in my children and grandchildren, I won't be around to see. It's like people who plant oak trees, I mean, it's not even their great grandkids that see them come to fullness. Or to take an example from the Old Testament that I mentioned just a moment ago, Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel. So Daniel gets hauled off to exile from Jerusalem when in the Babylonian captivity. I mean, he's bright as he can be. I mean, and so centuries later, we find that in Daniel's case, the brightest and best are forced marched to Babylon. Centuries later, the brightest and best from Babylon come back to Jerusalem, and they have on their lips, to Herod, they say, "Where is he born King of the Jews?" I mean, the wise men, the astrologers, the magi, whatever, coming from Babylonia. And so, I mean, and to me, that 4th century swoop there, is evidence of a kingdom life. I mean, that the circle gets completed, but it took centuries. There's no way in the world Daniel could know that he is, helping to contribute to, the population of nativity sets where we have 3 kings in all of that. So, I mean, God is at work way beyond the timelines of our own lives. And in fact, if I were talking about quantum spirituality, quantum physics, which many of you have written in and asked me to speak on. Um, you should see Hannah right now. But anyway, no one has asked me to speak, but in quantum understanding, where time is relative, it plays out for us over a long haul. It's instant with God, and and in fact, He's working back from where we're headed, and so that's why for us, we always have to turn around and see. We don't see God coming; we see Him going, and it's we look back across our lives and see His intervention. That's the way the kingdom works.
So, Reggie, how do you think things are going in terms of kingdom progress? Is the kingdom making headway?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I told a group of church leaders not too long ago, just relax, folks. I mean, the kingdom's doing just fine. And they looked at me like I had one eye in the middle of my head, which, is not an unusual expression for me to see on the face of people in the audience. But the truth is, the kingdom is unfolding, and it's unfolding right on time. It's unfolding, because God's never late. I wish He'd be early sometimes, but He's never late. And His purposes are being worked out because He's not making this thing up as He goes along. As I just said a moment ago, He's working. You talk about beginning with the end in mind. I mean, He's the master of that. And so everything is coming to fruition. Everything is coming to where it's headed. And we have just been privileged to be cut in on the deal, so that we are working and co-conspiring with God, and we get to see the kingdom at work. I mean, that's a very exciting place of privilege, quite honestly.
All this, you say, makes the Kingdom Saga a compelling story.
Totally, totally. I mean, it's in the end, it's because we're living it. I mean, if we understand the Kingdom Saga, then we understand that's the big narrative of our own lives. I mean, it's how God's story is playing out through your life, my life, the lives of the people around us, not as puppets. I mean, again, that's a very immature view of what God is up to. But it's like when our daughters were born. I know by virtue of them coming into the world, by them getting life, our daughters were given certain things. They were given joy. They were given sadness. They were given hope. They were given despair. They were given, this mix. They were given puberty. They were given broken relationships. They were given, all the stuff that we experience. Well, just because, but that doesn't mean that I foreordained my daughters to suffer and have heartache, but it's a part of the whole fabric of existence, and so we exist, but God is up to something. He's moving us toward an eschaton, a realization of life where we really get to experience it in all the fullness and all of its dimensions, which is beyond our grasp mentally or any other way right now.
All right. Well, thank you, Reggie, for throwing some light on the Kingdom Saga we're all a part of. Again, if you want to read more about this, pick up a copy of Reggie's book, Kingdom Come, at his website, reggiemcneil.org, or on Amazon, or wherever you get your books.
Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you.